The phone rang at 3:17 in the morning. I know the exact time because I was lying in bed in my post apartment staring at the ceiling, wide awake, the way you are when you know something terrible is about to happen and you're just waiting for confirmation. My phone lit up on the nightstand. I didn't even look at the caller ID. I already knew who it was. I already knew why they were calling. And I'm not going to lie to you. I let it ring 4 times before I picked up because some moments in life deserve to be savored. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning because you need to understand exactly who I am, exactly what I did for 22 years, and exactly why a brand new second lieutenant with a degree in political science thought he knew better than me. You need that context. Without it, the disaster is just a disaster. With it, it becomes something beautiful. My name, well, let's call me Staff Sergeant Mike Decker. That's not my real name, but it's close enough, and the people involved will know exactly who they are if they ever hear this story. I spent 22 years in the United States Army as a utilities equipment repairer, and then a plumbing and pipe fitting specialist, most 91C, later reclassified under the new system. If you're not military, that job title probably doesn't mean much to you. Let me translate it into civilian terms. I was the guy who kept the water running, the sewage flowing in the right direction, the heating systems operational, and the fire suppression infrastructure up to code on every single installation I was ever assigned to. Now, I want you to think about what that actually means on a military base. We're not talking about a leaky faucet in somebody's kitchen. We're talking about a small city, Fort Morrison. That's what I'll call it. Housed approximately 4,000 soldiers, plus civilian contractors, plus family housing. We had barracks, administrative buildings, a hospital, motor pools, dining facilities, a fitness center, ranges, and a whole complex of support buildings. Every single one of those structures needed clean water coming in and wastewater going out. Every single one needed heating in the winter. Many of them had specialized plumbing requirements. The hospital alone had medical gas lines, sterilization systems, and laboratory drainage that had to meet standards so strict that a single cross connection could literally kill someone. And I was the guy responsible for all of it. Not the only guy, technically. I had a small team over the years, usually 2 or 3 junior enlisted soldiers assigned to work under me. But I was the institutional knowledge. I was the one who knew that Building 4207 had a cast iron main that was original to the 1960s construction and would split if you looked at it wrong during a cold snap. I was the one who knew that the water pressure on the east side of Post dropped every summer because of a partially collapsed line under the parade field that nobody wanted to pay to dig up. I was the one who had drawn maps of pipe routing that didn't exist in any official blueprint because the Corps of Engineers had renovated 3 times without updating the as-built drawings. I was the one who knew that if you needed to shut off water to the brigade headquarters, you couldn't just close the valve on the north side because some genius in 1987 had teed off that line to feed the CG's quarters, and if the commanding general's wife lost water pressure in the middle of her shower, you were going to hear about it in a way that ended careers. 22 years. I deployed to Iraq twice and Afghanistan once, where my job was even more critical. In Balad, I kept a base of 8,000 people supplied with potable water using a system held together with literal baling wire and the kind of creative engineering that would make a licensed civilian plumber weep. In Kandahar, I rebuilt a sewage treatment system that had been damaged by a mortar attack, working 12-hour days in 115-degree heat while the smell alone could knock a grown man unconscious. I earned a Bronze Star for that work, not because I was shooting at anyone, but because without functioning sewage treatment, the entire base would have been shut down by disease within a week, and the mission, the actual warfighting mission, would have ground to a halt. I'm telling you all of this not to brag. I'm telling you because you need to understand the depth of specialized knowledge we're talking about. This wasn't a job you could learn from a manual. This wasn't something you could pick up in a weekend course. This was 2 decades of hands-on crawling through mud and worse, institutional knowledge that existed primarily in my head and in a set of battered notebooks I kept in my wall locker. I was, without exaggeration, irreplaceable. Not because I was some kind of genius, but because nobody else had bothered to learn what I knew, and the Army system wasn't designed to create redundancy for positions like mine. I was 48 years old. I had a bad knee from Kandahar, a shoulder that clicked when it rained from a fall off a roof in Balad, and I was 18 months from retirement. 18 months. I had my paperwork in. I had a job lined up with the Municipal Water Authority back in Ohio that was going to pay me 2,000 a year to essentially do what I'd been doing for the Army, except with better equipment, reasonable hours, and no one shooting at me. I was coasting, not slacking. I never slacked, but I was in that comfortable final stretch where you train your replacement, tie up loose ends, and start mentally transitioning to civilian life. The problem was that I didn't have a replacement to train. My last junior soldier, Specialist Hernandez, had PCS to Fort Bragg 6 months earlier, and the Army, in its infinite wisdom, had not sent me a replacement. I'd submitted the requisition. My platoon sergeant had pushed it up. It had disappeared into the bureaucratic void the way requests always do when they're not sexy enough for someone with stars on their collar to care about. Plumbing doesn't win wars, they told us. Plumbing isn't a priority, they said, until the toilets stop working, and then suddenly it's the only priority on earth. So there I was, summer of 2019, alone in my shop, which was a small cinder block building behind the motor pool that smelled like pipe dope and PVC cement. I had my notebooks, my tools, my institutional knowledge, and my 18-month countdown calendar pinned to the wall. Life was manageable. And then Second Lieutenant Bradley Chen arrived. Now, I want to be fair here. I've served under a lot of officers in 22 years, and most of them were decent people doing their best in a system that doesn't always set them up for success. The military has a unique dynamic that civilians don't always understand officers lead, but NCOs, non-commissioned officers, the sergeants, are the backbone. Officers set direction and make decisions. NCOs make things actually happen. A good officer listens to their senior NCOs, trusts their expertise, and provides top cover so the NCOs can do their jobs. A bad officer thinks their commission makes them an expert in everything, ignores the people who actually know how things work, and makes decisions based on what looks good on their officer evaluation report rather than what's actually right. Lieutenant Chen was 23 years old. He had graduated from West Point 11 months earlier with a degree in political science and a minor in economics. He had completed his basic officer leadership course, where I can only assume the portion on listen to your NCOs was taught on a day he was absent. He was assigned to our Directorate of Public Works as a facilities management officer, which meant he was, on paper, my boss's boss. Let me describe him to you, because the details matter. He was about 5'8", lean, with a perfectly pressed uniform at all times. His boots were always spotless. His hair was always regulation. He carried a leather, bound planner, and a tablet computer everywhere he went, and he had a habit of adjusting his glasses. Those black framed Army issue glasses that we call BCGs, birth control glasses, while making pronouncements about efficiency. He spoke in corporate buzzwords that he'd clearly absorbed from business podcasts. Streamlining operations, optimizing resource allocation, eliminating redundancies, he said, circle back, at least 4 times in any given conversation. I met him for the first time on a Tuesday morning in July. My immediate supervisor, Captain Williams, a solid officer who understood the value of leaving me alone to do my job, brought him around the facilities for an introductory tour. When they got to my shop, Captain Williams introduced me. Lieutenant Chen, this is Staff Sergeant Decker. He's our utilities specialist. He's the man who keeps every pipe on this installation functional. If you need anything related to water, sewage, heating, or fire suppression, he's your first call. He's got more time in service than both of us combined. I shook the lieutenant's hand. Firm grip. Eye contact. The handshake of a man who'd been taught to project confidence whether he felt it or not. Staff Sergeant, he said, glancing around my shop. His eyes moved over my wall of hand-drawn pipe maps, my shelving units full of fittings and repair parts, my toolboxes, and the ancient coffee maker that had been in that shop since Desert Storm. Interesting setup. How many personnel in your section? Just me, sir, I said. He blinked. Just you. Had a specialist until 6 months ago. Requisition for a replacement is in the system. He made a note in his leather planner. And you handle all plumbing and utility maintenance for the entire installation. Alone? Yes, sir. Routine maintenance, emergency repairs, infrastructure assessments, seasonal winterization, coordination with civilian contractors when we need major work done. All of it. He looked at Captain Williams. That seems like a significant single point of failure. Captain Williams nodded. It is, sir. That's why we've been pushing for additional manning. Staff Sergeant Decker is irreplaceable, and he's got 18 months to retirement. Lieutenant Chen wrote something else in his planner. Then he looked at me with an expression I'd seen before. The expression of a young officer who's already formulating a plan, already convinced he's identified a problem that everyone else has been too stupid to solve. We'll need to talk about modernizing some of these processes, he said. I've been reviewing the maintenance logs, and I think there's a lot of room for efficiency improvements. We should circle back on this. Looking forward to it, sir, I said, because that's what you say. You don't say what you're actually thinking, which was, son, I was snaking drains in Baghdad while you were in middle school. But the military has a rank structure, and respect for that structure is what separates a professional army from a mob with guns. So I smiled, I nodded, and I went back to work. That should have been the end of it. An introductory meeting, a handshake, a forgettable moment in the long, slow countdown to my retirement. But over the next 3 weeks, I started hearing things. The way you do on a military base, where gossip travels faster than an email and twice as accurately. Lieutenant Chen was making waves. He was holding meetings, lots of meetings, with spreadsheets and PowerPoint presentations. He was talking about cost analysis and labor optimization. He was questioning why the DPW had so many specialized positions when, in his view, generalist soldiers could be trained to handle multiple functions. My platoon sergeant, Sergeant First Class Rivera, pulled me aside one afternoon in the motor pool parking lot. Rivera was a good man, Puerto Rican, built like a fire hydrant, 20 years in service, and possessed of a finely tuned radar for incoming trouble. Deck, he said. Everyone called me Deck. You need to watch your six with this new lieutenant. What do you mean? I sat in on his resource allocation briefing yesterday. He's got a whole slide about redundant specialty positions. He's arguing that instead of having dedicated plumbing, electrical, and HVAC specialists, the Army should cross-train a general maintenance squad that can handle all three. I stared at him. Cross-train. In plumbing, electrical, and HVAC. That's what the man said. It takes 4 years of apprenticeship to become a journeyman plumber in the civilian world. Electricians, same thing. HVAC techs, same thing. He wants to combine all three into one squad of generalists. Rivera shrugged. He's got charts, Deck, color-coded charts. You know how officers love charts? Does Captain Williams know about this? Rivera's face changed, got a little tighter. Captain Williams got orders. He's PCing to Korea. Leaves in 3 weeks. That hit me like a brick to the chest. Captain Williams was my top cover. He was the officer who understood what I did, respected my expertise, and ran interference with the bureaucracy so I could focus on keeping the base's infrastructure alive. Without him, I'd be reporting directly to the chain that included Lieutenant Chen. Who's replacing him? I asked. Nobody yet, which means Lieutenant Chen becomes the senior officer in the DPW facilities section by default. I stood there in that parking lot, the summer heat radiating off the asphalt, and I felt the first cold tendril of what was coming wrap itself around my stomach. Rivera, I said, this kid is going to break something. I know, deck. Something expensive. I know. Something I'm going to have to fix. Rivera put his hand on my shoulder. Or something you won't have to fix because it won't be your problem anymore. 18 months, brother. Keep your head down. That was good advice. It was the correct advice. It was the advice I fully intended to follow. But Lieutenant Chen had other plans. 3 weeks after Captain Williams departed for Korea, 3 weeks during which Chen had been running the DPW facilities section with the unchecked enthusiasm of a kid who'd just been handed the keys to his first car. I received a formal memorandum, not an email, not a verbal counseling, a typed, signed letterhead memorandum delivered to my shop by Chen's administrative assistant, a nervous PFC who handed it to me like it was a live grenade and then practically sprinted back to the office. I sat down on my work stool, put on my reading glasses, and opened it. The memorandum was titled Arogan Isaac of Yasa Isma Iwantina Sisatia I Emitidio of I integrated my entinancy tem coan CPT. The key paragraphs, which I will never forget as long as I live, read as follows. Effective 01 September 2019, the facilities maintenance section will transition from a specialty-based organizational model to an integrated maintenance team IMT concept. Under this new structure, dedicated specialty positions, plumbing, electrical, HVAC, will be dissolved. Personnel currently serving in these roles will be reassigned to general maintenance duties or, where appropriate, to other sections within the Directorate of Public Works. Staff Sergeant Michael Decker, currently serving as utilities equipment repairer and installation plumbing specialist, will be reassigned to the grounds maintenance section effective 01 September 2019. His plumbing and utilities responsibilities will be absorbed by the newly formed integrated maintenance team consisting of 6 junior enlisted soldiers who will receive cross training in basic plumbing, electrical, and HVAC functions. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time because surely I was misunderstanding something. Surely a commissioned officer in the United States Army was not reassigning a 22-year plumbing specialist to mow lawns and rake leaves. Surely he was not handing the plumbing infrastructure of a 4,000-person military installation to 6 privates and specialists who had never so much as replaced a wax ring on a toilet. I was not misunderstanding anything. I picked up the phone and called Sergeant First Class Rivera. Did you see this? I asked. I saw it. It's putting me on grounds maintenance. I know. It's giving my job to 6 privates. I know, deck. Rivera, Building 4207 has a cast iron main from 1963. The hospital has a medical gas system that requires a certified technician to even inspect, let alone repair. The fire suppression system in the ammunition storage area has a pressure regulation issue that I've been manually compensating for every quarter because the replacement parts are on back order from a manufacturer that went out of business in 2014. You can't hand this to 6 kids who don't know the difference between a ball valve and a gate valve. I know all of that. I told him all of that. He told me, and I'm quoting here, that institutional knowledge hoarding is a symptom of organizational resistance to modernization. I sat in my shop, staring at my 22 years of hand-drawn maps and notes and carefully maintained infrastructure logs, and I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger, exactly. It was something colder than anger, something more patient. Did he just call me a hoarder? He thinks you've made yourself irreplaceable on purpose. Deck. He thinks you've been deliberately keeping information to yourself to protect your position. He said it's a common pattern in legacy personnel. Legacy personnel. That's what he called me. Like I was an old software system that needed to be decommissioned. What did you tell him? I told him he was making a mistake. I told him to at least keep you in an advisory role during the transition. I told him to give the new team 6 months of overlap to learn the systems. He said, and again, I'm quoting, that clean break is more efficient than a prolonged transition. A clean break. I looked at my calendar. September 1st was 12 days away. 12 days to transfer 20, 2 years of specialized knowledge to 6 soldiers who hadn't been selected yet. Rivera, I said, has he even picked the 6 soldiers for this integrated maintenance team? There was a pause. The kind of pause that tells you the answer is going to be bad. He's pulling them from wherever he can get bodies. 2 from the motor pool, 2 from supply, 2 from the headquarters company. None of them have any maintenance MOAs. He's planning to send them through a 2-week basic facilities maintenance course that he found online. An online course. I closed my eyes. I took a deep breath, and I made a decision that would shape everything that came next. Okay, I said. I'll comply. Deck. I'll comply with the memorandum. He wants me off plumbing and onto grounds maintenance by September 1st. I'll be on grounds maintenance by September 1st. He wants a clean break. He'll get the cleanest break he's ever seen. Deck, don't do anything stupid. I'm not going to do anything stupid, Rivera. I'm going to do exactly what a commissioned officer of the United States Army has ordered me to do. Nothing more, nothing less. I'm going to comply. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Malicious compliance, Rivera said quietly. I prefer to think of it as precise compliance, I said. I am going to follow his orders to the letter, every single letter, and I'm not going to volunteer a single piece of information that he hasn't specifically asked for. He hasn't asked for any information. Nope, I said. He has not. And that right there was the moment the fuse was lit. On August 31st, the day before my reassignment took effect, I spent my last shift doing exactly what I always did. I completed my rounds. I checked the pressure on the fire suppression system in the ammo storage area and made my quarterly manual adjustment. I inspected the aging main under building 402107 and noted, as I had in my logs every month for the past 3 years, that it was showing increased signs of corrosion and needed replacement before winter. I topped off the chemical treatment system at the small water reclamation facility on the south end of Post. I did my job. Every bit of it. Then I cleaned out my shop. I want to be very precise about what I did and did not do, because this matters. I did not destroy any government property. I did not delete any official records. I did not sabotage any system. What I did was remove my personal property. My hand-drawn maps, drawn on my own time, on my own paper, with my own pencils, went into a cardboard box. My personal notebooks, which contained 22 years of observations, measurements, quirks, workarounds, and institutional knowledge, notebooks I had purchased myself at the PX and filled on my own time, went into the same box. My personal tools, which supplemented the government issued tool set, and which I had purchased over 2 decades with my own money, went into my truck. I left behind every piece of government issued equipment, every official logbook, every formal maintenance record. Everything that belonged to the Army stayed exactly where it was. But here's the thing that Lieutenant Chen didn't understand. The thing that his political science degree and his color-coded charts and his 2-week online course could never have taught him, the official records were the skeleton. My personal notebooks were the muscle, the nerves, the living tissue that made the skeleton move. The official records said, Building 4207, water main, cast iron, installed 1963. My notebooks said Building 4207 main has a hairline fracture at the 3rd joint from the north wall. Develops a slow leak when ground temperature drops below 28 BFF. Temporary repair with compression coupling installed March 2016. DO not apply full system pressure without isolating downstream first or you'll blow the coupling and flood the server room in the basement. The official record said, fire suppression, ammo storage, annual inspection required. My notebook said, pressure regulator valve is a Grinnell Model 4400 from 1991, discontinued. No replacement available. Manually adjusted quarterly by bleeding 8 psi from the secondary loop using the petcock on the east riser. Third floor, do not use the main bleed valve. It's cross-threaded and will strip. Every system on that base had entries like that. Hundreds of them. Thousands of them. 22 years of learned the hard way, figured it out at 2 a.m., fixed it with baling wire and a prayer knowledge that existed nowhere in any official document. And I took all of it home, put it in my closet, and reported to the grounds maintenance section the next morning at Zuali 6:30, wearing my work uniform and carrying a pair of gardening gloves. September 1st, day one of the new era. I mowed lawns. I edged sidewalks. I pulled weeds from the flower beds outside the brigade headquarters. I did it quietly, professionally, and without complaint. When soldiers I knew walked by and asked why I was on a riding mower instead of in my shop, I smiled and said, new assignment. Lieutenant Chen's orders. Word spread fast. By lunch, half the base knew that the plumbing specialist had been reassigned to cut grass. The reactions ranged from confusion to outrage to dark. Knowing ladder from the senior NCOs who had seen this kind of thing before and knew exactly how it was going to end. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Chen's integrated maintenance team was assembling 6 soldiers, as promised. I'll describe them to you because the composition of this team tells you everything you need to know about how seriously Chen took the plumbing infrastructure of a military installation. Private First Class Kowalski, 20 years old, previously a supply clerk, had never held a wrench in a professional capacity. His primary qualification, as far as I could determine, was that he had once helped his uncle install a bathroom vanity. Private Torres, 19, from the motor pool. Good kid, knew his way around diesel engines, had absolutely no concept of what a P-trap was or why it existed. Specialist and guy in 22, headquarters company, administrative specialist. Could type 90 words a minute and had a talent for navigating Army bureaucratic systems. Could not identify a pipe fitting if you held it 6 inches from her face. Private Washington 18, fresh out of basic training. His Army career was exactly 11 weeks old. He still looked startled every time someone called him by his rank. Private First Class Dalton, 21, motor pool. Friendly, enthusiastic, willing to learn. Had the mechanical aptitude of a golden retriever. Lots of energy, very little precision. And Specialist Park, 23, the senior member of the team by time in service. Supply background. Organized, methodical, clearly intelligent. Also clearly aware that he was in way over his head because he came to find me on day 2. I was trimming hedges outside the dental clinic when he approached. He was carrying a clipboard and wearing the slightly panicked expression of a man who's just been told to fly a plane after reading a pamphlet about aviation. Staff Sergeant Decker, that's me. Specialist Park, I'm on the new maintenance team. I heard. Welcome aboard. He looked around to make sure no one was listening. Staff Sergeant, with all due respect, I need help. Lieutenant Chen gave us a binder with the official maintenance schedules and a login for this online training course. And I don't even know where to start. The fire suppression inspection is due next week, and I don't even know where the fire suppression room is in half these buildings. I looked at him. Nice kid. Smart kid. Being set up to fail by an officer who cared more about his efficiency metrics than about the people under his command. Specialist Park. I said carefully, I'd love to help you. But Lieutenant Chen's memorandum was very specific. I've been reassigned to grounds maintenance. My plumbing and utilities responsibilities have been transferred to your team. If I were to provide assistance or guidance outside my current assignment, I'd be operating outside the scope of my orders, and the lieutenant might view that as undermining his reorganization. Park stared at me. He understood exactly what I was saying. Staff Sergeant, are you serious? I'm following orders, Specialist. If Lieutenant Chen wants me to advise your team, he needs to issue that order in writing through the chain of command. But I'm sorry, Specialist, I truly am. But the lieutenant made it very clear that he wanted a clean break. I'm giving him what he asked for. A park walked away. I went back to trimming hedges. And I waited. The first call came 4 days later. It wasn't a disaster, not yet. It was a leaking faucet in one of the barracks. A simple job, the kind of thing I could fix in 10 minutes with my eyes closed. The IMT team spent 3 hours on it. They replaced the washer, which was the correct fix, but they over-tightened the packing nut and cracked the stem, which turned a dripping faucet into a faucet that couldn't be turned off at all. They then tried to shut off the water to that bathroom and couldn't find the shut-off valve because it wasn't where the building plans said it was. It was behind a false wall panel in the janitor's closet, which I knew because I'd been the one to relocate it during a renovation in 2011. They eventually found it by shutting off water to the entire floor, affecting 42 soldiers. The floor was without water for 19 hours while they waited for a replacement faucet stem to be ordered from the supply system. Lieutenant Chen was informed. He was not concerned. Learning curve, he told Rivera, expected during any transition. The second incident came 8 days in. One of the hot water heaters in the dining facility failed. This was a commercial grade unit, not the residential type you'd find in someone's house. It required specific knowledge of commercial plumbing systems, expansion tanks, mixing valves, and temperature regulation to prevent scalding. The dining facility served food to hundreds of soldiers, and water temperature was a health code issue. The IMT team attempted the repair. They watched a YouTube video. I am not making this up. Specialist Park later told me, after it was all over, that PFC Dalton pulled up a YouTube tutorial on his phone, propped it against the wall, and attempted to follow along step by step. They successfully removed the failed heating element. They did not successfully install the new one because they didn't understand that the commercial unit used a different thread pattern than the residential units shown in the video. They cross-threaded it. When they pressurized the system, the element blew out of the tank and sprayed 140-degree water across the mechanical room. PFC Torres received minor burns on his forearms. He was treated at the base clinic and returned to duty. But the incident generated a safety report that landed on the battalion commander's desk. Lieutenant Chen was informed. He was slightly more concerned this time, but he attributed the problem to inadequate training resources and announced that he was scheduling additional online coursework for the team. Let me pause here and tell you something about the way the military works, because it's important for understanding what happened next. In the civilian world, when your plumber screws something up, you call another plumber. It's annoying and expensive, but it's straightforward. On a military installation, everything goes through channels. Work orders, requisitions, approvals, funding authorizations. And the person who controlled those channels for the DPW facility section was Lieutenant Chen. He was the bottleneck. Every request had to go through him. And he had a vested interest, a career interest, in making sure his reorganization appeared successful. So he wasn't just failing to fix the problems his team was creating. He was actively downplaying them, reclassifying emergency repairs as routine maintenance, and burying the incident reports in administrative paperwork. I know this because Rivera told me. Rivera was watching the whole thing unfold with the grim fascination of a man watching a slow motion car crash, and he kept me informed during our off-duty hours. It's getting bad deck, he told me over beers at his place 2 weeks into the new regime. The team doesn't know what they're doing. They know they don't know what they're doing, and Chen won't let them ask for help because it would mean admitting his plan failed. As he asked me for anything new, has anyone in the chain of command asked me for anything? No. Then it's not my problem. Deck, it's not my problem. Rivera, I was told I'm redundant. I was told my methods are outdated. I was told institutional knowledge hoarding is a symptom of organizational resistance to modernization. I'm on grounds maintenance now. The lawns look beautiful, by the way. Have you seen the flower beds outside the brigade HQ? I've been aerating the soil. Rivera rubbed his temples. You're enjoying this. I'm following orders. You're enjoying following orders. I took a long sip of my beer, maybe a little, 3 weeks in, late September. The weather in our part of the country was starting to turn. Nights were getting cold. And this is where the story transitions from comedy to catastrophe, because what happened next wasn't funny. Not even to me. Every year, as part of my routine, I performed a winterization procedure on the base's plumbing infrastructure. This wasn't optional. This wasn't a suggestion. In a region where winter temperatures regularly dropped below zero, winterization was the difference between a functioning installation and a frozen, burst pipe, multi-million-dollar disaster. The procedure took me approximately 3 weeks, working alone, and it involved draining an antifreeze, treating every exterior spigot and exposed line, insulating vulnerable pipe runs in unheated spaces, testing and servicing the heat trace cables on critical water mains, adjusting the water reclamation facility for cold weather operation, and most critically, performing the quarterly manual pressure adjustment on the fire suppression system in the ammo storage area. The winterization procedure was not in any official manual. It was not on any official schedule. It existed entirely in my personal notebooks. Because it was a custom procedure I had developed over 15 years of hard-won experience at Fort Morrison. The official Army guidance said, perform winterization IAW local SOP. The local SOP said, consult installation plumbing specialist. The installation plumbing specialist was me, and I was mowing lawns. October arrived. The first hard freeze was forecast for the third week of the month. I knew with the certainty of a man who has watched the same systems respond to the same conditions for 15 consecutive winters, that if the winterization was not performed, we were going to have failures. Specifically, I knew that the uninsulated pipe run serving the east wing of the barracks complex would freeze first. I knew that the heat trace cable on the water main feeding the hospital had a splice at the 40-meter mark that failed every third winter and needed to be inspected and rewrapped. I knew that the fire suppression pressure adjustment in the ammo storage was overdue. I also knew that I had not been asked to do any of this. I had not been consulted. I had not been included in any planning meetings. I was, as the memorandum stated, on grounds maintenance. So I raked leaves. I want to be very clear. I thought about saying something. I thought about going to Rivera and telling him to warn Chen. I thought about writing a memo myself and submitting it through official channels. I genuinely struggled with this because despite everything, I was a soldier, and soldiers don't let other soldiers get hurt just to prove a point. But here's what I ultimately decided. I would raise the alarm through appropriate channels without directly intervening. I went to Rivera. I told him, in general terms, that winterization needed to happen. I did not provide specifics. I did not hand him my notebooks. I told him to tell Lieutenant Chen that the installation needed winterization and that the IMT team should consult the official Army technical manuals and the local SOSP for guidance. Rivera delivered the message. Chen's response, relayed back to me, was this: tell Staff Sergeant Decker that I appreciate his concern, but the IMT team is fully capable of handling seasonal maintenance. We don't need hand holding from legacy personnel. There it was again, legacy personnel. I went home that night. I looked at my notebooks in the closet. I looked at my retirement countdown calendar. 15 months to go. I cracked a beer, sat in my recliner, and I waited for the cold. The first hard freeze hit Fort Morrison on October 19th at approximately 2 in the morning. Temperature dropped to 11 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind chill put it well below zero. By 6 a.m., I was raking leaves in the dark, early morning detail, headlamp on, breath coming out in great white clouds, when I saw the first sign, a river of water flowing down the road from the direction of the barracks complex. Not a trickle, a river steaming in the cold air like a hot spring. A burst pipe, east wing of the barracks, exactly where I knew it would happen. By 7 a.m., the reports were flooding in, pun intended. The East Wing barracks had a major rupture in the hot water supply line. Water was pouring through the ceiling of the first floor from the burst pipe on the second floor. 40 soldiers' rooms were affected. Personal belongings were being destroyed. The soldiers were standing outside in the freezing cold in their PT uniforms, watching water pour out of their building like a waterfall. The IMT team responded. They didn't know where the shutoff was. Of course they didn't. The shutoff for the East Wing wasn't where the blueprints said it was. It was in a utility chase behind a locked panel in the basement, and the key was on a ring in my old shop, hanging on a hook behind the door, labeled in my handwriting. It took them 2 hours to find it. 2 hours during which thousands of gallons of water poured through a barracks building, destroying furniture, electronics, personal belongings, and the structural integrity of the first floor ceiling. But that was just the beginning, because while the IMT team was dealing with the barracks flood, the heat trace cable on the hospital water main failed at the splice point at the 40-meter mark, exactly where I knew it would fail. The main didn't burst, not immediately, but it froze. And when a water main to a hospital freezes, the hospital loses water. And when a hospital loses water, it cannot sterilize instruments, it cannot flush systems, it cannot operate. The hospital commander, a full colonel, contacted the DPW directly, not through channels. She picked up the phone, called the DPW office, and demanded to know why her hospital had no water. Lieutenant Chen took the call. I was not there for it, but Rivera was, and he told me later that Chen's voice had gone up approximately 2 octaves and that he used the phrase, "We're working on it," 14 times. By noon on October 19th, Fort Morrison had 3 simultaneous plumbing emergencies, the barracks flood, the hospital water main freeze. And this was the one that scared me, genuinely scared me, the fire suppression system in the ammunition storage area, because no one had done the quarterly pressure adjustment. No one even knew it needed to be done. And when the temperature dropped and the system pressure fluctuated the way it always did in cold weather, the overpressured secondary loop blew a relief valve. The fire suppression system in a building full of live ammunition began dumping water. Not a lot, not a catastrophic failure, but enough. Enough to trigger every alarm in the building. Enough to require an emergency evacuation of the ammunition handlers. Enough to bring the installation commander, a brigadier general, out of his morning briefing to personally inspect the situation. I heard about it from my grounds maintenance supervisor, a civilian named Frank, who came to find me while I was mulching a tree line near the post chapel. "Decker," he said, "the whole base is falling apart. There's water everywhere. The hospital's shut down. Something's going on at the ammo point, and they've got the fire department out there. And I just heard on the radio that the Kuno's building has a sewage backup." A sewage backup. Yeah, the sewer main behind the brigade headquarters. Apparently, the new maintenance kids tried to clear a blockage yesterday using a pressure washer because they didn't have a snake, and they blew a joint apart in the main line. Now it's backing up through the floor drains in the headquarters building. I put down my mulch rake. I stood very still, and despite everything, despite my righteous anger, despite my vindication, despite every petty molecule in my body that wanted to say I told you so, I felt a cold wave of genuine concern wash through me. Because the ammo storage situation was dangerous, not annoying, not expensive, dangerous. People could get hurt. "Frank," I said, "I need to go." "Go where?" "I need to go talk to someone." I drove to the DPW office. I walked in through the front door. The scene inside was pure chaos. Phones were ringing off the hook. Soldiers were running back and forth with radios. Someone had printed out a list of emergency contacts and taped it to the wall, and people were calling civilian plumbing contractors from the phone book. Yes, the phone book, trying to find someone, anyone, who could come to the base and help. Lieutenant Chen was standing in the middle of the room. He was holding his tablet in one hand and his phone in the other, and he looked like a man who had just realized he was drowning and couldn't remember how to swim. His glasses were slightly crooked. His uniform, for the first time since I'd met him, was rumpled. There was a coffee stain on his sleeve. He saw me. Our eyes met across the room, and in that moment, I watched something happen that I had seen before in combat in Iraq and Afghanistan. The look of a person who is confronted with a reality so far beyond their capability that their brain simply stalls, like an engine that's been flooded. Staff Sergeant Decker, he said. Lieutenant Chen, we have a situation, several situations, from what I understand. He swallowed. The hospital doesn't have water. The barracks are flooded. Something is happening at the ammo point. And the brigade commander just called me personally to tell me that there is raw sewage coming up through the drains in his headquarters building and flowing into the hallway outside his office. That does sound serious, sir. He looked at me. The room had gone quiet. Everyone was watching. Staff Sergeant Decker, I need your help. There it was. The sentence I'd been waiting for. The sentence that tasted like 22-year-old scotch and vindication, and every hedge I'd trimmed, and every lawn I'd mowed, and every weed I'd pulled while this man's arrogance slowly, systematically destroyed the infrastructure I had spent 2 decades maintaining. I could have savored it longer. I could have made him beg. Part of me, the petty human, angry part, wanted to look him in the eye and say, I'm sorry, sir, but I'm on grounds maintenance. This isn't my responsibility anymore. Perhaps your integrated maintenance team could consult their online training course. But I didn't, because there was live ammunition sitting in a building with a malfunctioning fire suppression system. Because there were patients in a hospital without water. Because there were soldiers standing in the freezing cold, because their barracks was flooded. And because, despite everything, I was still a staff sergeant in the United States Army, and those soldiers were my responsibility whether a memorandum said so or not. I need a few things first, sir, I said. Anything. First, I need a written order, right now, on paper, signed by you, temporarily reassigning me to emergency utilities repair and authorizing me to take whatever actions I deem necessary to restore functionality to the installation's plumbing and utility systems. He nodded frantically. Don't. Second, I need Specialist Park and PFC tourists assigned to me as my assistants effective immediately. Don't. Third, I need you to personally call the garrison commander's office and request emergency procurement authorization for materials and parts. I'm going to need things I can't get through normal supply channels, and I'm going to need them today. How much? I don't know yet. But it's going to be a lot, sir. We're past the point of band-aids. Whatever it takes. Fourth, I paused. This was the important one. Fourth, I need you to understand something, Lieutenant. I need you to hear this, and I need you to remember it. What's happening right now is not because your soldiers failed. They did their best with what they were given, and what they were given was nothing. No training, no knowledge, no support, and no respect for the complexity of the systems they were asked to maintain. This is happening because you made a decision without understanding what you were deciding. You looked at a spreadsheet and saw a redundant position. What you didn't see, what you refused to see, was 22 years of expertise that cannot be replaced by an online course and enthusiasm. The room was dead silent. You could hear the phones ringing in the background, unanswered. Lieutenant Chen's face was white. His jaw was clenched. For a moment, I thought he was going to pull rank to reassert his authority to tell me I was out of line. But he didn't. He just nodded. I understand, Staff Sergeant. Good. Then let's get to work. I went to my truck first, got my personal tools. Then I drove home, breaking the speed limit, I'll admit, and retrieved my notebooks from the closet. Every single one of them. I trudged. The ammo storage situation was the most dangerous, so I went there first. It took me 40 minutes to manually bypass the failed relief valve, bleed the secondary loop to the correct pressure, and stabilize the fire suppression system. 40 minutes. The solution required a specific wrench, knowledge of a valve location that wasn't on any blueprint, and the understanding that the Grinnell 4400 pressure regulator needed to be set to a specific pressure that was different from the manufacturer's specification because of the unique elevation and pipe routing of that particular building. Nobody knew that but me. It was in notebook number 7, page 43, written in pencil in 2008. Next to hospital. I found the heat trace cable splice failure in exactly the location I expected, repaired it with materials I had park requisitioned from the emergency fund, and had water restored to the hospital by 4 p.m. The hospital commander, the Kuno who had called Chen in a fury that morning, came to find me personally. She shook my hand. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. The barracks took longer. The burst pipe had caused structural damage to the ceiling, and the water had soaked into the walls. I repaired the pipe itself in about an hour, but the building was going to need extensive renovation. Drywall, flooring, mold remediation. That was going to cost money, a lot of money. The sewage backup at brigade headquarters was the last thing I tackled, and it was the worst in terms of pure, visceral awfulness. The IMT team's pressure washer stunt had blown apart a clay pipe joined about 15 feet underground. Raw sewage had been flowing into the soil for 24 hours, and the backup into the building had contaminated several offices, including, and I cannot stress how much this mattered in terms of what happened to Lieutenant Chen's career, the office of the brigade commander himself. I called in a civilian contractor for that one. It was beyond what I could do alone with hand tools. The excavation, pipe replacement, soil remediation, and building decontamination took 11 days and cost, according to the final accounting I later saw, approximately $347. The total cost of the October 19th disaster and its aftermath, barracks renovation, hospital emergency repairs, ammo storage fire suppression overhaul, sewage line replacement, building decontamination, temporary billeting for displaced soldiers, emergency procurement of materials and contractor services, and the high Zymet response for the sewage contamination came to $2.3 million. $2.3 million. Because a second lieutenant thought my job was redundant. The aftermath unfolded exactly the way you'd expect in the military. There was an investigation. Not a criminal investigation. Chen hadn't broken any laws, but an inspector general inquiry into the DPW reorganization and the events that led to the infrastructure failures. I was interviewed. Rivera was interviewed. Specialist Park was interviewed. Lieutenant Chen was interviewed at length. The IG report, which I saw excerpts of through channels that I'm not going to describe, was devastating. It found that Lieutenant Chen had implemented a major organizational change without adequate analysis, without consulting subject matter experts, without a transition plan, and without any understanding of the systems he was responsible for maintaining. It found that he had ignored repeated warnings from senior NCOs. It found that his integrated maintenance team concept had no doctrinal basis, no training plan, and no chance of success as implemented. Lieutenant Chen received a formal letter of reprimand in his permanent file. For an officer, especially a junior officer, a letter of reprimand is essentially a career death sentence. He would never be promoted again. He would never command anything. His military career, which had begun with such promise at West Point, was functionally over. I was told he requested a transfer. He got one. I don't know where he went, and I didn't ask. I felt no satisfaction in his downfall. That's not true. I felt some satisfaction. I'm human. But mostly I felt tired and sad because the whole thing had been so completely, utterly preventable. I was restored to my position immediately. A new captain arrived within a month to take over the DPW facilities section, a prior enlisted engineer officer who had started his career as a 1P, a prime power production specialist, and who understood infrastructure and the NCOs who maintained it. First thing he did was sit down with me, open my notebooks, and say, "Staff Sergeant, tell me everything." And this time, we're putting it all in the official records. We spent 3 months building a comprehensive digital and physical knowledge base, a transition document that captured everything in my head and my notebooks. When I finally retired in March of 2021, I handed that document to my replacement, a young sergeant who I personally requested and spent 6 months training. And I walked off Fort Morrison knowing that the base's plumbing was in competent hands. My replacement called me once about a month after I started my civilian job in Ohio, just to ask about a valve in building 4207. Third joint from the north wall, I asked. Yeah. How did you know? Replace the compression coupling. Don't apply full system pressure until you isolate downstream. And Sergeant. Yeah. Write it down. I remember that phone call at 3:17 in the morning, the one I let ring 4 times. That was the night of October 19th, 2019. Lieutenant Chen calling from his office, surrounded by chaos, asking for help. I picked up on the fifth ring, and the first words out of his mouth were, "Staff Sergeant Decker, I made a mistake." "Yes, Lieutenant, you did. But the pipes don't care about mistakes. The pipes don't care about your degree or your charts or your efficiency metrics. The pipes only care about one thing. Does the person touching them know what they're doing?" For 22 years, the answer was yes. For 3 weeks, the answer was no. And the Army paid $2.3 million to learn the difference. Thank you for listening to this story. If you've ever had a boss who ignored your expertise and paid the price, drop it in the comments. I'll be reading every single one. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button because next week's story is even worse. This is Deck signing off. Keep the water flowing and the sewage going where it's supposed to go.